Hey, welcome everyone back to D-Pod. So we are starting a new series that I'm very creatively calling Peers, because I'm going to interview some of my peers and friends from college back when we were in Berkeley. So as our first guest, I have Dan Kinder with me. Hey, Dan.
Hello.
All right. So yeah, Dan's here with us. Yeah, we both went to college at Berkeley together, graduated in 2011. It didn't overlap a whole lot during college. Besides, I think we served together in various things. But I remember our senior year, we were in the we combined our small groups, if you remember that. Like we used to have those prayer meetings.
Yeah.
All sit around in a big circle. Like how many guys? Like 15, 20?
Yeah, sizable. Like I remember that's the one they had like the Japan had tsunami and like we're praying for that together, that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I remember that was when our different like fellowship worlds were colliding a lot more, and then we definitely got to kind of interact more like as postgrads too. Yes, about like you right now, like your family, where are you living, what are you doing for ministry, your job, stuff like that.
Yeah, for sure. And just because you mentioned the past, and yeah, we didn't interact like too much in college, but I will say for our listeners here, like DP, I've always appreciated a very, very competent guy. Really glad that he's using it for ministry now that you are, I think it's awesome. I always thought of him as like the camera sniper. Like if you weren't in church, you probably would have been a sniper somewhere, but instead used it to do camera stuff. And anyway, I always thought of you.
Pictures of people, whether they like it or not. So
It's good. Yeah. So right now I live in Maryland, College Park, Maryland. We're ministering at the University of Maryland there, international ministry. So we're doing Four Corners, mostly grad students. And I'm married to Amy. We got married in 2014 in San Diego. At that point, I was in San Diego. I was in San Diego for a long time, until 2019, and then came out here to the East Coast. And I have two kids right now. So Billy is 6, and Heather just turned 4 a couple days ago.
Nice.
So yeah, that's the family situation. It's fun. I like that the kids are old enough we can play games and stuff like that. Yeah.
Wow, you're almost at 10 years now of marriage.
Yeah. Next year will be 10. Mm-hmm.
Wow. That's awesome. And what do you do for a living now?
Oh, so I'm a software engineer, a manager actually now, software company. I've been in the same place for 12 years. And
since you graduated, right? Oh, no. You were at another company.
Practically. Yeah. Technically, I know we're peers, but
you graduated early.
I technically graduated 2010. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I worked somewhere for a little while and then came over where I'm at now. And so I work with a bunch of church guys. It's remote. So it's really flexible. So I'm thankful for that. I've been there a long time. Yeah.
Yeah. It's nice. Do you mind saying where you work?
That's fine. Yeah. I work at Turnitin.com. I was a little careful with that because I know students are like having an allergic reaction right as I'm saying that and stuff. And
I know.
And I'll just say,
have the allergic reaction.
and I'm just like, you know what? If you haven't done anything wrong, it's all good. Okay. I'll just put it that way. But I work on the systems that actually generate those similarity reports and all that kinds of stuff.
Yeah, and making sure that you have your academic honesty while you're in college and in high school and all that stuff. So let's go back. Let's go back to college and maybe talk about your faith journey. Just, how'd you become Christian? What's your background like? So what was your spiritual background like before maybe coming into college?
So I grew up going to church. My parents, my family, it's all Christian. So, been going since the womb. And I think midweek youth group and that kinds of stuff too. So not just like Sunday. I mean, so I always understood that to be an important thing. And so I knew when I was heading off to college, like, okay, I'm going to find a church somewhere. I think I had I had a strong sense of like the truth of Christianity, that God exists and stuff. And like my dad is always into reasons to believe, the org and stuff like that. He liked scientific kind of stuff because he was a technical director at Northrop Grumman, the aerospace and all that. So then I think that it just gave me overall sense of confidence about Christianity's truth. But church was just sort of like, well, I'm a Christian, so I better go to church. This is like what God wants me to do, go to Bible study, whatever. But I didn't like the people a whole lot. I kind of stayed in the background and tried to do like tech stuff actually. So yeah, that's kind of leading up to college. But yeah, I mean, college, my brother's 4 years older than me, doesn't come to our church anymore, but he was coming to our church when I went to Berkeley, and he was at Berkeley first. So I got like plugged in really, really fast to our church in Berkeley because like I already knew, him and then his peers, and I stayed with them like right when I came to visit stuff. So that was cool. So I got plugged in there really quick.
Yeah, I don't know if you
Yeah.
know this, but your brother, he was one of the first people I actually met at our church because he did ride
Oh,
from Foothill Dorm where I
okay.
was staying. So I got a ride from him a few times. I remember my first couple weeks of attending our Berkeley church service. So yeah. So
That's cool.
you're not the
Awesome.
first kinder I met. Yeah.
Yeah. For a while, I was referred to as Little Kinder,
Oh
actually,
yeah, yeah, that's
because
funny.
for those who don't know, I'm among my brothers. I'm the smallest. Like they're bigger. Yeah. So
But you're tall. You're not short.
I'm about 6'2", but
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, I'm the smallest.
Yeah. It's crazy. So when you came into college, so you came to our church there, and but your relationship with church was a little, like you weren't sure like how much you enjoyed it. It's maybe an obligation. Like, so what's your vision for life? Like, and maybe like I don't know if it's tied to that, but what was like different about our church? Like, what did you experience when you came?
Yeah, that's a good question. Also, a vision for life, right? Like I was hyper independent. I think it had to do with moving various times when we were kids. I kept like losing my friends, and after a while, kind of internalized that you're like, you know what, friendships and relationships aren't worth investing in. I was very sort of robotic, and so I think those are some of the reasons for it. But yeah, I liked computers, like technology. Computers don't argue with you, and you don't have to relate with them. They do what you want. And I like designing systems and this kind of stuff too, right? The engineering side of things. So then coming in, it was like my vision is I'm like, yeah, if I could. I also liked kind of more of the outdoors, mountain kind of thing. I would high school over summers would go to like camps in like Colorado and stuff like that, and
Hmm.
like 14ers and whatnot. And so yeah, my vision was really like, oh man, if I could like be in like a cabin near like the Colorado Rockies, away from people, but with
Hmm.
fast internet, that would be perfect.
Wow.
Right. So for me, that was like, that would just what would be awesome. Because I was like, I don't really want to deal with people. People, yeah, it's very sort of transactional view of people. But yeah, I mean, our church is obviously very, relational, but it was really loving. And
Hmm.
I really appreciated that. It was very warm. I really appreciated that there weren't a bunch of complicated like dating triangles and stuff like that because my youth group was all like that.
Oh,
And I
interesting.
think that's
Hmm.
why I didn't like a lot of the people. It was like my best friend there was kind of my leader who was the tech guy.
Hmm.
And I worked who's like 30 years older than me, right? But because it was like all these people, it's too complicated, and I don't like dealing with any of that.
Hmm.
But with our church, there was none of that. It was warm, interested in you, and especially as a freshman homecoming, it was like we have pizza and we have ultimate frisbee. Like I'm good, I'm home. This is
Hmm.
great.
That's awesome.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so that was great. Aside from not, I guess, wanting to invest a lot in relationships. I mean, I valued that people cared and stuff. That was good. I think coming freshman year, I mean, definitely the aspect of like leadership, the fact that there were people who were interested in me and weren't like challenging me up front to do anything per se, but it was like, oh, we're going to do discipleship. Like, you want to be discipled. And so I was a terrible Course 101 student, by the way. So anyone taking Course 101 or whatever, like the Course 101 where it'll ask you stuff that's kind of like answered like right afterward because it's to help you comprehend and reflect, right? It's good to get you to thinking. But I was a guy who would write, my answer would be like see below, and then I'd just move on, right? It was really lame. And so I got very little. But I think a lot of like the beginning of college was things that helping to expose spiritual pride and helping to expose me to like, man, I think I know this stuff, but I really don't, and
Hmm.
I needed that kind of exposed for me. So working on like my salvation testimony, for instance, and realizing, wow, there's some real flaws in here and stuff that was big for me because it was like that had been such a solid pillar. Now I felt like, oh man, but I'm missing stuff. So that was good. I needed a lot of humbling. I also had it was kind of like had a hard face, I think, in terms of people feeling like, oh, I'm gonna be careful what I say to this guy
Hmm.
because he won't be happy to hear a feedback or whatever. And I don't even think I realized it. It took me a while to kind of understand that. But yeah, I think being here and just here is good teaching, Bible-based teaching, but also like leaders who want to help me move along. And then aside from that too, like both of my roommates, Alex and Brendan, so our
Hmm.
peers,
Yeah.
I randomly roomed with them freshman year, and that was good. That was a little bit like iron sharpening iron. It
You
started
didn't know them,
as
right? You
I
didn't.
didn't know them before.
Yeah.
No, we
Okay.
were
But you all happened
brand new
to
together
come out to the same church.
because I was coming. Alex had gone to church before, so he's like, "Hey, can I come?" Sure. And then Brendan just want to be left out, so
Mm.
he was like, "Can I come?" Sure.
Nice.
So I don't take any credit, evangelistic credit for any of that. I was just happened to be there as a body.
Right. Hey, that's something.
But aside from initially really getting ourselves, spreading all our bad habits to each other, it did end up being good ultimately to like, oh man, okay, like Alex is going to prayer meeting and I'm not, but I was like Christian longer or whatever. This is so lame. Like I should go. There's that kind of stuff that helped form me, but I don't know if I'm getting ahead of your question here, but
Oh no, yeah, no, just go for it. Yeah.
but yeah, so trying to focus on the big stuff, I guess. You know, for me, going through like a freshman, sophomore year, I think just a general teaching of our church about like, you know, spiritual disciplines and also serving. I mean, the fact that you're like a minister and stuff, it should be serving others. Like I had enough preaching of that by the end of like late sophomore year, the big conviction was like I'm useless. I'm not serving anybody right now. I just serve me, you know? And that just has to change somehow. So a big part of my testimony, I guess not in terms of becoming a Christian, because I still say, look, I became a Christian in 1998 when I decided to follow God. And I think as a kid, I wanted to without like understanding a lot of what that meant. So that's without getting complicated. That's usually what I say. But kind of late in sophomore years, just realizing, man, like my life is just utterly selfishly lived. And I got to serve somebody. So I was just remember praying to God, like, if you give me an opportunity to serve somebody, I'll serve them. And then right then the email came out asking for volunteers for the coming year for Impact and Joyland, right? So these were children's ministries that our Berkeley church was doing, both for Oakland community kids and you know, for the kids at the church. And I was like, oh no, I don't like kids.
This isn't what I was asking for.
It was not. It was like, God dang it. But I had that conviction. I had kind of already stated. I don't know if I had written down that, but that was my thought, was like, I'm going to do what comes up. And so then it's funny because they even give you an opportunity in that to sign up for like, do you want to be like just a helper? Like the dude in the background, you like cook the breakfast for the kids and it's kind of, you know, 6-month thing, or all the way up to being like a team lead. Like you've got a team of kids, you got to call them every week. It's a 1-year commitment, you know. And I was like, no way, helper.
Yeah.
Right? I signed up for help. And so I go for that. And we had the first big event, Fall Fest. And they had so many kids that Tony's son comes up to me and he's like, hey, I need another team lead today. And I'm like, wow. Oh gosh, okay.
Oh wow, yeah.
But then, you know, I kind of had my words to it, my own kind of commitment to God had. I kind of knew what the answer needed to be. I'm like, okay, let me, you know, take off the helper shirt, put on the you know, the team lead shirt kind of thing. Did that for that, but I took comfort in like, okay, it's just Fall Fest, just for this one thing. But then after that, he's like, hey, we need more team leads like for the year, actually. And I'm like, oh, okay. So then I said, okay, to do that for the year. And gosh, I would not take that back.
Wow.
I think children's ministry is special. I think it opens up your heart in a way that other ministries don't. Because within like a few months, you know, like it's the same kids coming every week. And yeah, I have to do things that like were really outside my comfort zone. Calling these parents and going on outings with them. And, you know, you do have to deal a little bit with like a child disciplinary kind of issues and stuff. You know, it's all not my favorite. Not to mention like our kids program involves like songs where like you're dancing. Right. And yeah, you know, dancing.
That's like, probably not your desired placement.
And you know, I hated dancing, but yeah, all of that. I mean, just getting out of comfort zone. That's just it's just steps of faith that always involve that, right? And but man, it was big. And it's like after only like a month or two, right? Now I'm seeing the same kids, and they're like, "Teacher Dan," and you know, and they run up to you because they know you. Then after that. And it's so much more fun at that point. So anyone who's having doubts about like, oh man, I don't like kids that much, like it gets way better. Like once they know you and you know them and stuff, like man, it's not so stressful. And it's not so like I don't know what to do with them because they're not a machine, you know, which is like kind of my background.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was huge. And so I'd recommend anybody doing that. I think like the joy that came into my life as a result of serving was really apparent, not just to me, but even other people. Because before doing that, it was sort of like kids. Why would I want to go see it? Like Joyland Christmas celebration. There would be kids doing like a Christmas pageant, right? I'd be like, why would I go to that? A bunch of kids flubbing their lines. Okay. But then the year after, it was like, my kids are going to be in that, you know? And then I actually want to go there, you know? It's just clear change. And people that know me were like, like the junior year, like, that's when you became joyful. Like that's when I started to smile in pictures, you know? And so, yeah, that was big.
God was turning your heart of stone into a heart of flesh, something like that.
Oh yeah, and I think like having a commitment that like you need to not be selfish and serve others,
Yeah.
and then just taking a concrete step to do it out into your comfort zone. That's what made that happen.
Yeah. When you were sharing it, it made me think about some kind of maybe common themes or principles that at least I've experienced. I've seen a lot of people experience at our church. The whole thing you were saying about like how, like at the end of sophomore year, like I'm not serving anybody, right? Like what's going on, right? And the whole priesthood of all believers idea. I think for me, how I experienced that was that like I didn't see myself as someone who was qualified to do that. I think the kind of church environment I grew up in, or in the way that I viewed myself, like I really thought like I'm not qualified for service. I'm not qualified for ministry. I'm not spiritual enough. I'm not whatever enough. But I think what happened at our church is that like I was given something, like I was given a vision. I was given the identity that God actually has for us, which is that we are called to be this, whether we feel like it or not, whether we feel like we deserve it or not, because it's something that God's doing through us. And so like I think that's how I experienced that shift in my own heart too. And then the other thing I heard is, interestingly, when you were sharing, I was actually, before you mentioned Tony's son, I was thinking of Tony's son, because one of the really formative experiences for me is my sophomore year, I went to a mission trip with Tony's son, and we were doing street evangelism, like house to house door, like, evangelism. And I was paired up with Tony. So I thought like, well, obviously Tony is like, the leader of the trip. And so he's going to do all the talking, but I was ignorant, and I didn't know that what he would do is he would ask me to share my story. Right. And then, but I think that was a really powerful experience where, wait, I have something to share. Like I have something to contribute to these people. Like, and I have the gospel, and then just based on the need in front of us, we learn to live into it. Right. And that's a little bit of how you became a team lead for Impact, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's just sort of, there's a need. Well, I guess I can fill the need. And then you end up like growing a lot through that. So.
Yep.
Were there other like formative kind of experiences or decisions that you made in college that like as you look back on it now, like paid dividends?
Yeah. Couple. Well, one, just because it's kind of closer to this end of serving others. Same year I did Impact, I also signed up for Inner High, and that was the very first iteration of Inner High. So it's when we had like Sean McDowell and Craig come to do these big monthly things and whatever, and that was good. And I think what was formative about that actually was going out to like a high school club every week. And after a while, it was just us college students doing that. We were driving out there. We were talking to the club leaders about what would help them, sort of like a very early AOIM,
Yeah.
And same thing where like after a while of trying, like you go into it feeling like, I don't know what I'm doing. And so I was trying to do some Bible teach because they needed some help. And in some cases I was like going alone actually, but then I felt this commitment, like they need somebody, so I'm going to go, And yeah, just, feeling more a sense of like, yeah, they have this need. And so just growing of heart. So it's both for kids and for youth. But then, otherwise, I think there's different kinds of equipping. Like, I think part of it is my personality type. I think is more like, I do like to, I think gather knowledge and be confident, know how to do things and all that. But that's something that is like, in a way, important but not urgent, right? And so it requires just regular, steady, like learning over time. And so for me, that started more or less my sophomore year. So that's where I knew I was interested in things like philosophy, apologetics, theology, whatever, right? And so that year, not to mention, like, I'm so lame. I claim to be a Christian for so long and have never read the Bible cover to cover, right? Right. I think we've been through that at some point. So it was my sophomore year, right? When going into sophomore year, I think around there, when I was like, that's so lame. I need to remediate that. And so then I read the Bible cover to cover that year. But then in addition to doing that, I was also like, yeah, I'm interested in like getting equipped and like philosophy and apologetics. So then there's this textbook called Philosophical Foundations for a Christian Worldview, Will Knight Craig and JP Moreland. So I read that year too.
Well, you read that cover to cover?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
It's good. It's a good text. Yeah. And including like at the time, a big podcast is listening to that I found really helpful. And it's a little, I guess a little bittersweet too, but like the RZIM, their speakers, they're really good. But anyway, yeah. So just sort of like hearing things and being like, I think if I can think about that, taking advantage of the time too, because it's just, so it was end of freshman year. It was basically, I had one of those commitment moments of like, hey, we're going to move to an apartment. that's going to be end of video games, right? Because I haven't talked about video games yet, but I was a huge gamer.
Mm.
I got friends into games. It was like, Dota, Team Fortress 2, some stuff that's still around, right?
Mm.
I was playing lots of that, but just knew like this is useless to God's kingdom. Like, what am I doing? And so quitting that, I'm thankful that I didn't think I needed something to replace it with first in order to just say, something good will come just from basically being like, I'm uninstalling, I'm done, And doing that led to like learning to cook, all sorts of other useful things, doing some Photoshop, whatever. But then it led to reading. Like before that, I was like, man, books are boring, right? But then it led to like, well, actually, I have more attention span now, like read. So all of that, yeah, that's a big one. I think I've been sort of a reader ever since and known like, okay, there's a value. It's a regular practice I'm going to try to upkeep. It's not all just nerdy apologetic stuff, but it definitely started there because I had the interest and I felt like, you know what? Part of this is a part of the battle line. I feel like I can tackle that a lot of people don't tackle or don't feel capable to tackle. I'm like, okay, I'd love to be there and be able to be a resource in that. So those are some things that come to mind.
Can I ask, like, do you have any habits or like structure that you use, like that you used in college or even now, like in terms of just being able to read consistently?
Yeah, in college, well, I'm a night person, and that helps because it basically the before I sleep time has always kind of been like a reading time for me. In college, it helped that I didn't care that much about like grades and performance and stuff. And I wasn't like the most stressed about studying and all that, right? I was like, whatever, I'll be all right. But so that helped with giving some time. But I think even now, like, okay, having 2 kids, having an infant, it's taking advantage of the time, taking a lot of advantage of audio. And so I definitely use like Libby, ChristianAudio.com, all that kinds of stuff. Listen to online lectures, biblicaltraining.org, whatever. There's so much good audio content. I now have I have a list in like my Todoist app of like audio, video, and reading that continues to grow ridiculously long, but it helps me prioritize and be like, what's going to be next? Instead of just being, let Spotify's homepage determine that for me. I don't want to do that.
Right.
But doing that, and now I know that there's some pretty boring lectures I can still make it through. But so part of this is being a night person, but I guess that, both audio, taking advantage of those times, like, short drives or like while I pop in the earphones while I'm folding laundry, while I'm doing dishes. That's making time in that respect. And then for reading books, for me, it's like, the kind of before I sleep time.
Yeah. So kind of coming back to the formative things, like, so there's a lot of reading. I'm starting to fill yourself with that. Anything else you want to mention there before maybe we do a deep dive into more of the apologetics topic?
Yeah. Reading, learning, growth. I mean, of course, we had, just church and the leadership and teaching, the discipleship retreats and stuff like that we went to, right? There was no course 201 at the time, but like I remember like our junior discipleship effectively covered some of that stuff and things like that were obviously very formative as well. But nothing else like sort of sticks out.
So just being a part of the rhythms of the church life and everything that was offered, I guess.
Oh yeah. No, definitely.
Okay. Yeah. How about, let's get into apologetics. So, you started talking about like how that, became something that you started getting into. And then how did that develop into, it seems like, I mean, because you've since really kind of decided to kind of become an expert in that area, so to speak, or like, really keep growing in that area. Like what happened? Was it just like a personal like interest, or were there some other reasoning behind that?
Yeah, I mean, some of that is personal interest. I think I've for sure been pegged as like the apologetics nerd in a way, whatever. And that's not. I have a lot of other interests other than that, just to make people aware of that. But yeah, it was just this sense that like, oh, this is like valuable. I like I like having discussions and conversation with people who don't believe the same, and I want to, understand why they believe what they believe. And there's the structured thinking element of that. So I think that made me interested. But yeah, it started with some studying, and then opportunities just sort of came up in a way, right? Like that started to be recognized just because, I like give an answer to something, and people are like, oh, wow, that's a pretty good answer. That makes a lot of sense, or whatever. And that sort of developed into like one of the ways that I guess I got kind of pegged on this in a bit is that coming out of our first year of ministry, like Pastor Ed and the leaders at Berkeley at the time were like, hey, if anybody wants to start a more experimental group for the fall, and do something different, come and pitch it, And then so me and Kevin Lee and then Ken Lee joined us as well. We basically plotted and we were like, it'd be awesome to do a group that's more oriented toward the skeptics, people who have questions and they really want answers before they're going to like believe something. And so that's where Crosstalk was born. And so we did that. That's the name we ended up coming up with. And that was a neat year. There's some people who came then that, are still coming now, several.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's one of the ways it played out.
So tell me about like, maybe just tell us a little bit about Crosstalk. Like what was different about Crosstalk's approach to ministry or reaching the college campus?
Yeah, aside from us being really nerdy, but it's valid. You know what? Your DNA matters. You know, it's like, okay, if you got a DNA of a group, that's the kind of people you're going to attract. Actually, so there's a law of attraction there. But we did things like our first Friday was called Reasons for Faith. And so we did apologetics oriented things. Our content for our first semester was Course 101, and we didn't we didn't advertise it as come to Course 101. We advertised it each topic each week, right? It was like, does God exist? And then talk about some of the chapter 1 type of stuff and whatever. So we tried to just sort of tackle that head on. And we also did a forum. So Friday nights would be that, but then Thursday nights would be something we called forum. And forum would be more discussion oriented, and it would be on some topic like, like, do I have a soul, or does God exist, or, that kinds of stuff. And we ended up finding that people transitioned to Friday pretty quickly if they were going to stay at all. But it led us to some good relationships with people.
Do you have any sense from doing ministry over the past, decade, like how has apologetics or like the effectiveness of apologetics, have you seen that shift at all, or the types of topics that people are interested in? The reason I ask is because I think when I think about my college experience and the types of questions that I was answering and the types of questions that I had, I get the sense that the kinds of questions that like the current generation of college students is asking is a little bit different. It's not as, and maybe it's just, it's not like it's completely shifted over. It's not binary, but like maybe there's a shift. I don't know if you've noticed any of that.
Yeah. It's a little hard to speak to from my vantage point doing international in the past 2 years or whatever. But, and I think there's some stuff that may have already been shifting, 10, 12 years ago that we didn't quite pick up on. But I think definitely people care a lot about like the goodness of God and not just that he's there. And there's this sense of like, I care about stuff that's like ethical in a way. So I remember like, even just a few years out of college, actually, like one of the workshops that I ended up doing, it was for one of these like Winter Institute or whatever. They were like, hey, could you do a workshop? And I'm like, oh, sure. And so I just took like a common questions workshop I did and just basically was that. And, one of them, or I guess two of them were like, there's too much like violence. What's the deal with the violence in the Old Testament, right? And what about, is God violent or egotistical or whatever, And that kind of stuff. Even at that time, it seemed to hit a nerve. People were like, really interested in that. Actually, I got a shocking amount of signups, I think, based on those questions. But I think those have only grown since then. And of course, now you've got even more kind of gender issues to deal with. And
I think a lot of identity questions nowadays, it seems
for sure.
like. Yeah.
That I agree with.
Yeah. Like, I was talking with one of our younger postgrads here, and she was saying that, like, for example, a question nowadays is, like, can you be, like, like if you're an African, for example, like what does it mean to be an African and be a Christian, right? When like Christianity is associated with like white men in America or something like that. Obviously, historically, that's not the case, right? But that's sort of some of the prejudices that people have, right? And so like these are the kinds of questions that maybe people are asking, and not so much like, does God exist per se, right? Although those are obviously related, but yeah.
You've got the critical theory, class-based kind of stuff and whatever, and it needs to be addressed. So love to see more talks developed and that kind of thing. I think we recycle a lot, the topics that we've already done, and they're not bad, but even the way we address them has to, I think keep morphing. Keep getting improved.
So what have you done like over time to keep growing with or keep up to date with regards to this? Like for me personally, like apologetics was a large part of it was motivated by my own questions. And then once I was satisfied, I I kind of like hit a walls almost. I don't really care to learn more, right? Until I had to like answer other people's questions, and then I have to keep up. But like I don't know how that played out for you and how you keep up with that stuff. So
No, it's super similar. And I mean, I think we have similar personality. We're actually like the same Myers-Briggs type too,
I
right?
think so,
And
yeah.
so things like that. Not that Myers-Briggs is the be all end all.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I totally relate with that of like, I'd encourage anyone who, yeah, just not to be mentally lazy. So when there's like, obviously if it's a question like I already know I want the answer to, okay, we're going to seek that out. But I know for me, one of the things that helped was saying, yeah, am I really satisfied with the answer to this question? And even if I don't care all that much, it's like, well, someone might ask me, and I want to reach a point of satisfaction with the answer. And I think maybe part of the motivation for that came from the belief that, you know what, my worldview should be consistent, and that if I'm going to serve others, I should be able to explain what I believe and stuff, right? So that definitely led to some research and searching things out. It's hard to keep up with everything for sure, and I don't try to, but my experience is also that the breadth of questions people ask is actually not that wide. It's kind of the same common 50-ish things that people are asking about, but they'll ask in different forms, But, if anything, I think what's more valuable than like knowing a lot and having a lot of answers, because I feel like there's a lot I'm not even like that into like the scientific apologetics kind of stuff, and being able to talk about like the way mitochondria, whatever. Like I'm not, I just have never been great at that. Right.
Right.
But then just conversation stuff. I would love to see somebody do a good workshop on tactics. Here's how to, you don't even have to know anything in order to have a nice, productive conversation and ask the right questions to someone who's raising an issue. So I felt like that being able to do that made it look like I have a lot more answers than I do actually,
Oh, that's interesting.
So I'd say there's that too.
Yeah. So how to handle yourself in a question and maybe be comfortable with not knowing the answer and yet navigating a conversation. Like, I think
totally.
Yeah.
And it's things like saying like, oh, just because he's asking questions doesn't mean the burden of proof is on me, and that, half the time, like what they meant by their question isn't what you should think they mean, so there's that kind of like, I guess, humility about interpretation. And then there's just the sense that like often people are asking, but they themselves don't have like kind of a consistent worldview behind the question. And sometimes the question will sort of self-destruct, but it might as well do it in their hands instead of in yours, right? Mm-hmm. And then if you ask the right stuff, like, oh, what do you mean by blah? What do you mean by blah? Then half the time they're like, actually, I'm not sure. Or they start to answer it themselves. And even if all they're doing is clarifying, there's so much more fruitful answer kind of thoughts that come to your own mind in the process of that, And so I'm like, you know what? You learn some basic answers to things, but I find a lot of the apologetics questions that people are most scared by, when people get motivated to study apologetics, often it's because they're like, oh, I'm afraid someone might ask me blah, and I don't know. But I'm like, you could get a lot more comfortable if you just know how to ask some questions in response, right? When they're like, oh, what about these extra gospels? There's more than 4 or something, right? That'd be like, how do you know there's more than 4? Right? Because I mean, I know about the Gospel Thomas and the Secret Gospel of Mark and whatever now. I had to study that, right? But if you're like someone who's never studied that, you're like, oh, I've never heard of extra Gospels. What is this? It's sort of like, you don't have to accept that burden of proof. Just be like, oh, what do you mean? Yeah. And I think if you do that, then half the time they're like, I don't know either. You're done, and you can look into it,
or it's just something they heard.
Comfortable with that,
yeah,
exactly. Half the time it's just something they heard, and it's not even really. They don't even really care that much. It's you don't want to get all intense if they don't actually care that much about that particular question.
Yeah, that's interesting. What do you have what's like one thing that like a younger person can do to get equipped in this area? Like, is there something you recommend, a resource or something like that, or practice?
Yeah. So as far as like the tactical end of things and just how to handle these conversations, right? We have some courses sort of related to that. But definitely, I mean, I think that Greg Koko's book, Tactics, is kind of a classic. Mm-hmm. I'm sure you could find a shorter version that's like a talk on YouTube or whatever. But, it ultimately boils down to asking, what do you mean by that? And how did you come to that conclusion? And if you just sort of practice doing that and have a sense of comfort about yourself and not knowing the answer to stuff, that's going to go 80% of the way in my experience in like apologetics or those kind of encounters. As far as other equipping, I usually recommend as a starting point, saying, hey, look, there's really like a top 5 or top 10 questions that if you know the answer to those, that it lets you kind of bleed over into other things. And that's stuff like understanding how to answer like relativism, world religions. Does God exist? Is that good? Don't get it wrapped up talking about like the moral argument for God's existence. I don't think that really has weight with this current generation. But yeah, so one source of that, we have actually put together a site where we tried to put together some of the better videos that answer those questions. And that's apologeticsqna.com. And so that's one place to start. Of course, reasonablefaith.org is really good, and there's other good stuff out there. But they're also overwhelming. A part of my problem with some of those sites is that they started out answering some really good questions, but then now they're trying to answer further questions, and then you're kind of like, I don't know where to start. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So we tried to make apologeticsqna.com just like, let me just focus on like the high level,
Yeah, I totally
the
forgot
most
about
important
this.
ones.
Yeah. It's apologetics QNA, like the letter N.
Yeah, so it's apologetics Q and then the letter N A.
Yeah. I totally forgot about this. Yeah, this is a great resource.
Yeah, and it's not supposed to like have everything in the world. It's supposed to be like, hey, look, this is the top stuff, and we'd love to add more to it. But yeah,
nice. Yeah, that's great. All right, we're gonna do a hard shift now, and we'll talk about balancing work and career, because we've talked about on previous podcasts how bivocational ministry, co-vocational ministry, it's one of the unique aspects of our church. It's not unique as in like, we're the only ones who do it, but I think we're unique in that we have like 99% of our members who are engaged and mobilized in some sort of ministry where it's ministry towards people, like people loving ministry. And it's because we really, really try to take the priesthood of all believers just at face value and try to really live that out. But that means for a lot of people that they have to balance this thing, which usually takes up other people like entire lives, right? Work, career.
Yep.
And then there's like this other thing that you do, which is also really not only time consuming, but emotionally consuming, mentally, like just, it's a lot of commitment. So like, can you talk a little bit about that? Like challenges, like how do you make that work? Like maybe just start with your current context.
Yeah. So it gets more difficult once you have kids, of course. Mm-hmm. And man, it's a broad topic. One of the things I think is special about our church network that I think is probably the core thing that makes this possible. In my opinion, it's a sense of surrender. I think without that, none of this would be possible. It's just a sense that like I'm on a mission. I am a domestic missionary. And when I have that mentality, that gives me the sense of like, yeah, I'm gonna use all the resources I have to do this mission while doing work. So that even goes back to college, being at some point, that not just the quitting the video games thing, but like there was a certain point when I still kept up with some stuff that was more entertainment-ish, like, reading web comics or whatever it was, right? And there was a certain point I was like, what else could I do if I got rid of that, And I wouldn't want to be legalistic and be telling people like, get rid of all sorts of things that they enjoy or whatever, right? But from an own personal conviction perspective, it's like, yeah, so just a sense of surrender, I think, over time and all of that, right? So that's not going to be specific. That's not specific to me at all, and it's not because I'm more surrendered than anybody else or whatever within our church, but I think it's worth calling out that as the high level, like, I think unless you have that, then the rest is going to become like really, really difficult. And that's going to come from just obeying, like take up your cross and follow, and respecting that, hey, we can, like, missionaries that go to other countries can do this. Why can't we do that here? That kinds of stuff. But yeah, so in terms of balancing it, like work, I mean, I enjoy my work, and I could have seen work being something where like I go to higher levels or whatever. Like I'm a senior manager right now. I get paid pretty well for that work and all that, and that's nice. But it's not the priority. It's something I'm there to make money in, and support other guys. And we've got other guys that we've hired on, and to enable them to be able to do what they do. We try to have our team policy actually make that workable for people and all that.
You mean by other guys? You mean like people, younger guys at our church, or?
Yeah, I mean we've got team members that are not at our church too.
Right. Mm-hmm.
We've got a mixture, but yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So I see it as it's like a very practical, I guess, perspective of like, yeah, this is the kind of thing I'm trying to serve through that. But whenever it comes like that versus like a way I can serve God, it's kind of obvious which one's going to win. And that's held me back some. I mean, when I initially moved and I first went remote,
Hmm.
it was before being remote was such a big thing. And at our company, like you've got a certain limit on how much you can like move up if you're remote, right? So for a long time, I was like a kind of effective under the table manager, kind of leader, team leader, but couldn't be a manager because I was remote. And that,
Mm.
honestly held me back for a fair amount of time, but it was like, it's totally worth it. So anyway, I guess that's getting more into the career side. But yeah, in terms of balancing it, again, it's broad. I almost need a starting point with that. But I mean, it's taking advantage of your time, and for sure, I mean, it requires some care with schedule and stuff like that, and trying to take advantage of the time. So I mentioned with reading, or like I'm going to listen to audio, like while I'm driving or whatever, and when I do have time, that's going to be, this evening I need to watch the kids. Well, I'm going to make the most of like the time with the kids, and whatever,
Mm.
and eat with them and read books with them and all that. It does require like fitting in ministry stuff and being surrounded with weekends and that kind of thing, which again, I think if you have missional perspective, that's worth it.
Yeah.
It requires a greater efficiency, I guess. I mean, I had to learn like, productivity over time. And I think that's going to be important just for your capacity. If you don't get a lot done, then it's pretty hard to
Mm.
manage it all. And so I've had to learn things in order to get more done. And I think that idea of getting more done or productivity, it's not just about like, oh, how quickly can you read a book or how quickly can you wash a dish? Those matter. Like, and yeah, you should just get more skilled at things, and that's good. But I think it's also really how you arrange your work and your schedule and
Mm.
how you prioritize, basically being like, yeah, there's certain things I'm not going to get to, I'm not going to do, and that are going to drop out because of making time for other things.
Mm.
But yeah, for sure, like doing it with others is what makes it all like feasible, right? We're watching each other's kids and all this sort of stuff. And the kind of fellowship and community gives a lot of energy to the thing that we're doing. Yeah. So
Maybe I can ask this like a slightly more practical angle, because since you work remotely and like a lot of our postgrads in Chicago, they work remotely. And, like a lot of them, they were involved in raising up this church from the ground up. And so they're, obviously very invested. And I think the work ministry life balance, it presses in both directions. Like sometimes work presses into life and ministry, but also sometimes ministry and life presses into work. And so like, how do you deal with like, I'm more interested in like, especially because you're like a senior manager, I'm sure you have lots of responsibilities at work. Like, what do you do to like make sure that you're like doing work, you're being a good witness, you're not cheating your employer's time. Like, is there something that you do to kind of keep yourself a person of integrity in that area? Like, how do you manage that?
yeah, that's a good question. I think considering it's stealing from my employer, if I'm taking time that I told I'm giving them that, and then not giving it to them, and that's sort of a matter of integrity. And I think that matters partly because a lot of people have jobs that are like, doesn't actually require my full time. And I will say on that point that if you're in a job like that, that's nice for now, but you're not necessarily going to grow personally through that either, And that job, well, when they find out it doesn't actually require all your time, I don't know, that type of job can get constrained at some point. You never know when that might happen. But yeah, there's a sense of responsibility that like the time I'm giving if I decide, today I'm going to just like leave at 2 p.m. to, whatever, do some ministry stuff or whatnot. For me, it's like, I think about when I'm going to like make that up, and I'm going to try to do that later because I don't want to be considered to be stealing from them,
Right,
I might
right.
even take a couple hours of PTO or something like that. So I think that's got to happen. A lot of it comes down to boundaries, and those boundaries can be drawn in pretty deliberate ways, both with ministry taking over work or work taking over ministry, and with work itself. Like even as a manager, I have a bunch of meetings, and like a lot of my lunch times are shot, right? Because I'm in meetings and that kind of stuff happens. But I also have sort of I've established when it comes to like, talking to my own managers or bosses. I mean, my immediate boss is Tim Fitz in Berkeley, right? So, but like talking to our VPs or higher level people, I'm pretty upfront about stuff that I'm not going to do. And I think establishing your expectations and your boundaries before you get yourself in hot water is the way to go, and it's good. And so first going remote and stuff, right? I'm like, I know I don't want to do a bunch of travel, right? And they would have liked me to do more travel, but I was upfront. I basically said, you know what? Like I'll travel for maybe 2-3 days a quarter at most.
Hmm.
And I've held that for 12 years. And so not no travel, because then I'm like, that's a little lame. And actually getting together with our team in person is good and stuff. It's got value and whatever. But, and then if they basically said, hey, we're having this other conference thing, can you come and whatever? I'll say things like, well, this is how much I travel. So if I come for this, I'm not coming for that. So like, which one do you want? You know? And that kind of stuff, it's going to hold you back in some ways. But I think it's better to kind of have that up front, actually. So that's one suggestion.
Yeah, that's good.
It might that might be with respect to like meeting times and stuff, you know, being like, okay, look, I've got certain, like on my calendar, I'll block out stuff where I'm meeting with students. I'm going to block that out or say no to certain meetings where like, oh, I might get ahead by being part of that meeting or whatever. You know, it's okay to say no to meetings and whatever, and just say, hey, look, but being upfront about that, it's always better received than late down the line being the guy who constantly misses meetings for no good reason because it's like, well, I had a ministry thing I was asked to do or whatever. But the boundary, I think, goes the other way. I do think, you know, it's hard for us within the church to know like what each other's workload is like and stresses. And so then it means people are going to be like, hey, can you help me do Costco shopping, you know, this afternoon? Because I know you have a chill, flexible job, right? You know? And
you have to be able to say no.
You have to be able to say no.
Yeah.
You know, just
That's
frankly,
what it comes down to.
No.
Yeah.
Sometimes, it sometimes might seem, and they don't maybe feel like it feels weird to them in a way because it's like, well, you're just going to be at this computer all afternoon, right? Because maybe you're someone with not so many meetings.
Yeah.
But it's like, no. This is like their response. This is what I was responsible to do, you know? And so for me, it means that I'm like, I'll use PTO for things if I need to, or just be honest or straight up, be like, hey, look, there's stuff I want to do that's going to take additional time off. And those questions being upfront is often helpful. You know, like you can talk about being like, there's a lot of ministry stuff I want to do and I get paid, you know, pretty well. I don't even have to get paid quite as well as I need to or whatever. So let me talk with my manager about being like an 80% worker, you know, being 32 hours a week or whatnot, right? That stuff can be done. But yeah, I think it's be careful about like drawing your boundaries.
Oh yeah, can we talk about that? Yeah, because you went 80% at your job, is that right? Or...
In the fall, yeah, starting in the fall, I decided to do that. There's just, you know, we don't need the extra money, so it does dock my pay and whatever by 20%. But yeah, that's been a big blessing. I basically have 1 day a week that I take off.
Oh, I see.
But I flex that quite a bit. But again, if it's like there's a random afternoon where someone needs something and I go out and do that instead of working, I work part of my Friday in order to kind of make up for that.
Yeah, that's awesome.
We're recording this on a Friday when that is off. And after this, I'll be doing message prep. So it's really helpful.
Yeah.
But it's just having that up front. Like a lot of workplaces are actually pretty amenable, you know? And it's just after a while, your integrity is something that will show through your wake. You know, there's that book Integrity by Henry Cloud, really good book and worth reading. And he talks about your wake, kind of the reputation that you leave behind yourself from not just one action, but a pattern of actions and things that you leave behind. And I think that this kind of attitude and the way I've said, this is what I'll do, this is what I won't, it's left a wake of not just the negative of like, oh, this guy, we can't get him. Because sometimes there's like, they want me to go and manage this other team or this other whatever. And I'm like, nope, not going to do it. That of course is like our management wishes that weren't the case. But I think the way because it's not just me being upfront and having this kind of principle, right? But the way that we've done that and said like, yeah, they know that like, if I said I'm going to work or whatever, you know, I'm going to get things done. Yeah. Has also left a positive of like, these are trustworthy guys, you know? Yeah. So don't underestimate that either. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I don't know if you know, but there was a period where I went 60% when I was at Salesforce. And it was for, I forget, like 4 or 5 months. And it was when I was doing Bible teachers training. And so 2 days a week, I went into our church instead and did all day. Like it was like 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. type of training. But yeah, I was thankful that, you know, like, yeah, we were very upfront. I was like, hey, I want to take 2 days off. I got a 40% pay cut because of that during that time. But I think because I remember there was an email exchange with my boss's boss who had to approve it, right? And he was saying like, well, you know, like he has a proven track record of like doing work, you know, when he's supposed to be working. So I think we can trust him with this, right? So yeah, exactly. So I think that's the thing. Like you have to just consistently just do what you're gonna say you're doing. And if you're not gonna do it, say you're not gonna do it. Like just your words have to match what you're going to do, right? So I think that's really important. And the more you do get done with the time that you're doing, the more that they're going to not worry about that, right? And that includes even little things. Like I feel like a pattern for our church people is, yeah, knowing, oh, well, my work is not really my priority. My mission is like the ministry I'm doing, right? And 100% yes, because I don't want to encourage the wrong people here, right? Like
Right,
it's
right.
not about my job. My job was going to really conflict with that. I'd go find another one.
Because the thing is, I mean, you could have done a lot more, I think, if it weren't for ministry with your career.
I think
mean,
so.
Yeah,
I think so. But then because of that attitude, I think one of the things it does lead people to do is be, I won't say like lazy, maybe in some cases lazy, I guess, at their job, but feel like somehow it's wrong to take initiative, right? And I don't think it's wrong to take initiative. And initiative is one of the things that will make you stand out and may look like, oh yeah, we trust this guy, right? And so, for me, one of the ways that looks is like I'm doing like a lot of design architecture kind of stuff right now, and it means that if someone sends around a design doc on like, hey, there's this thing they're trying to do and whatever, right? I'll take the time to like read it and put just one intelligent comment or question on that thing, you know. Or in a meeting about something, I'm going to try to keep track of what's going on so I can just ask one intelligent question or something. And that's not a lot, actually, but that initiative has led to a lot of like opportunities and just shows, you know, like, so we shouldn't feel like that's a wrong thing. You know, I think that's led to a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. I've given this advice many times, like, because the thing is, like, I don't think, I mean, our work is a large chunk of our lives, right? I mean, you know, full-time job is 40 hours a week, big chunk of your life. And like, I really do think that should be a place where we're really trying to grow our character, just our like soft skills, like at work.
Yep.
I mean, there's so much you can learn through that. And so then I personally have a hard time when, you know, I see younger brothers or sisters and they're in a job that's sort of either like their brains are just deteriorating because they, you know, it's just so under challenging, right? And or the other problem where, you know, like really it can be viewed as this classroom for character, but instead it's this like idol that they're pursuing, and it's just taking over their life, right? And so there's the two extremes, right? And somehow we got to find a balance in the middle there. So then maybe we can zoom out. I mean, we're coming up at an hour, so what? Like, as you think about, so it's been 12 years since we graduated, okay, from college. So as you think about the past 12 years, everything that's happened, I mean, all the life transitions, all the different moves. I mean, we didn't even get to talk about, like, you know, your time in various church plants, but what's something that you're grateful for, right? Like, you're grateful as you think back on the past 12 years. And then, like, I don't know if there's like a regret that you have, like something that you would have done differently, like when we were, you know, young and our prefrontal cortexes weren't fully developed. Like, I don't know. Yeah. I don't know if there's something that comes to mind. So I'll just pose a question like that.
Oh, boy, I am very thankful for our church and the leaders who've been, you know, leading it, Pastor Kelly and the many other leaders I've had since then and under them, and there'll be a lot to name. But part of why I say that is because I think God was leading me to a place where, like, kind of what I really needed fit quite well with what our church provides. And one of the number one things there being constantly interested in how can I provide you ministry to do, because I needed that in order for my heart to be in the right place and in order for my life not to turn into a bunch of, you know, gaming and developing open source software, right? Which is not going to, might make me a name at conferences, but it's not going to bless anybody, really, right?
Yeah.
So there's that. So I've been given ministry opportunity. It was all the way back from that crosstalk thing to the opportunity to go, like, you know, serve college students in San Diego and whatever. And I think it's it was a lot later that it occurred to me that, you know what, all along there were leaders sitting in meetings, looking at lists of people or whatever, trying to figure out, like, with my name right there, among others, trying to figure out where can we put him or have him serve or minister that he wants to be, of course, but also that's going to give, like, that growth so that, like, the Spirit of God can work through him more, you know, and realizing there are people that happen is a real blessing. So I'm thankful for that, and to be able to do a little bit of that myself for others, you know.
Yeah.
But also our church's constant attention to the need for reflectiveness and having your soul in the right place and all that kind of thing, right? Because I'm not like naturally. I think I'm reflective in terms of like cognitive type of stuff, you know.
Hmm.
But in terms of like reflective with respect to like, do I have a heart of the shepherd, and understand versus dealing with my apathy, right? That kind of stuff. That's a priority for us, right? That kind of spiritual discipline, and so any young guys who feel like, let's stop dealing so much with reflecting or preaching the quote unquote same thing over and over again because I just want to like get out there and do things and be more like I don't know. There might be people like me out there somewhere,
Yeah.
and to them I'd be like, there's a reason why these spiritual disciplines and why reflection is kind of in there in our way of life, right? Yeah. So in terms of thankfulness, it's just okay. That's the way God's led my life, and I'm thankful that just being willing. And being willing doesn't have to not mean a lot of initiative. Like there's stuff I took initiative to do, but usually, God's initiated that. And so if there's a lot to be thankful for, obviously thankful for also my wife, my family, and lots of people. But to pick a couple things out, there's that regret though, right?
Yeah.
So it's a tough regret of the past year. Gosh. That's really not an easy one. Like, there's things I regret about the way I am, of course, right? Like, or the things that I do. And number one among them, I think, being like, given my past and devaluing relationships, I've come to develop a lot in I think understanding the way I am and realizing, oh man, there's some connections here on why actually having empathy for people is just difficult, right? Like I internalized this whole thing about how that's too dangerous, don't do that, and having to undo that with the truth of scripture. So there's that, but then, and that still leaves effects now, of like, it's hard to care. And I'm an overall apathetic kind of person, I've even had to hack around it, like my wife thinks it's funny that like, if it would make her care, to like, oh, get flowers, like, well, I'm going to put a task on the task list to get flowers. And I'm not, right. That feels like kind of lame, but she also understands it's like, I'm trying to care, not be like, but then if I just expect all of a sudden I'm going to like start wanting to do lots of random things out of bottom of my me putting there represents me wanting to do it, but it's still kind of hacking around it. So there's a lot I wish were different in terms of having a much more natural shepherd's heart, thinking a lot more about people and about people's needs. And I've had to just sort of do things to hack around that. And so, I guess that's kind of a regret. Maybe not doing more about that. I don't know exactly what I would have done. But and I think including caring about people, not just the ones that I'm ministering to, but and peers, but different family members and people like that. Like I wish I took a more evangelistic approach to a lot of them, that I'm sort of learning to do now. A lot of stories being shared helps with motivating, like, okay, look, I've got a bunch of these cousins we visit when we go back and visit Arizona, and I'm learning to be more deliberate about like, I want to have spiritual conversations with those people and kind of getting some of the tools. That's something that I kind of didn't do for a long, long time. So I guess to pick a regret, there's that. Yeah. It's a hard question though.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah. I mean, we talk about like how, like regrets are not necessarily all bad things, right? Like, I mean, regrets, like if you make any decision, like you end up having regrets because you did this, there's this thing you didn't do, right? So, kind of speaking to your point about like reflection, like sometimes it just helps us to think back on it and then allow that, wow, like even if there's like these regrets that we have from like the past, whatever years, like God still was working through that and he's still continuing to work and the gospel covers over all of it. So.
Yeah. And I think, like maybe for me thinking of regrets is a little harder, partly because I'm very like, if I've decided something and I know why I did that, I'm not really going to look back and second guess and all that,
Right.
So there's a lot of things where I feel like, being held back or like whatever, that there's a lot to not regret as well. So I guess I'm thankful for that. Yeah.
I appreciate that. So then looking forward, so if we, 12 years since graduation, let's just fast forward 12 years. So 2035, what's your 12-year vision? Just, it doesn't have to be comprehensive, but, just something that comes to mind. What do you want to be doing in 12 years?
And it's funny because think about vision, right? Like, were you at that like
The
sophomore
discipleship retreat. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So this is a classic story among our peer class, and I won't name names, but yeah, we're at like end of freshman year discipleship retreat. I think that might have been like the first time they ever did like a freshman discipleship retreat at our church,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, I think so.
And part of it was a vision casting time, right?
Hmm.
And people had the wildest, like they want to be part of a traveling band in Africa kind of stuff,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or be an astronaut on the rocket to the moon, that kinds of stuff.
Right, right.
Some absurd stuff. But what was funny about that is that a lot of people had really wild like visions, but I was really practical because like I was one of the last ones to go, I think, and I was like, you know what? I don't know, 5 years, 10 years. I think I'm just going to be like kind of working at a job while I serve at church. It was very like kind of uninspiring.
Oh, yeah. I think I remember that. I think we all didn't know how to respond.
Yeah. But let it be said, first off, that I was the one who was right.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was not the most inspiring thing. But I think in a way that's like, looking at the next 12 years, it's not like I need to be a well-known person or have a big group. I think there were a time I would have said I would want to be like leading a thing with many people or something,
Yeah.
But I don't even know if I need that. It's more just going back to this idea of like our work in the gospel involves a battle line. And I just want to be at the right spot in that battle line where there's not a lot of other people in order to be holding it up. And I think that hopefully my vision is for that to be much more of like upholding other people, because I think that's the way to multiply anyway, right? Like there's only so much you can do yourself as it is. And the more that you can equip other people to do things and be raising up other people to do them, then the better,
Yeah.
If that's apologetics, that's cool. That's great, or special talks or like whatever. I'm good with that if that's like where the value is going to be. And I also fully expect that to involve care of actual people, because I just think you can't divorce like kind of resource work and content from like shepherding of actual people and knowing where they're at and stuff like that. So in a sense, it's not so different than 12, 14 years ago, whatever, in that my ambitions are not really, I'm not like Mr. Let's get missionary to Japan or to whatever kind of person. Cause
right.
More power to people who want to do that. I'm not against doing that. I guess part of this for me is like, I'll go where God wants me to go. So I almost, in that sense, kind of don't care in a good way.
Yeah.
And then that like, oh, if he's going to do this, well, then let's go do that. I think that uncomplication has been a big blessing, or led me to blessed situations, So in the way it's not so different, but yeah, I guess it's resource providing, teaching. I mean, I like teaching. And I like learning and being able to then condense what I'm learning and be able to pass it on to others in a way that's going to be really valuable to them, and then training them to do the same thing. I think that maybe is a hot spot. So I like that. And of course I like just teaching Bible and whatever to students who need to hear the gospel. So I hope to be continuing to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. When you were saying, in some ways your vision is the same as the one you said 12, or like 14 years ago, it made me think though that, yeah, like to be someone who, is working and serving Jesus through the church, like the word that you said earlier, surrender, came back to mind, because actually to be someone who's doing that requires, that sounds very simple, but that requires a good deal of surrender on a daily basis, right? And so there is something beautiful about, like, I think that's the crazy thing about like people. I see people at our church serving at every level, so many co-vocational ministers, and they're daily making that surrender to say, hey, I could after work just spend time for myself and my family, but hey, I'm actually going to open up my heart and my life to all these people that quote unquote I have nothing to do with, but because of the gospel I have everything to do with. And so I don't know, like I think that is going to be what continues to drive our network forward, that like all of us need to just daily commit to that again and again. So
Yeah. I even kind of thought of that this morning. Psalm 73.
Oh yeah.
Devotions, like talks about envy of the wicked generally, right? And stuff, and missing, they have all these freedom and opportunity and they're fat and sleek and all this sort of stuff, right? And but then when I went into the sanctuary of God, and I feel it occurred to me, I'm like, this can apply in the Christian world because we live in an age where there's this whole kind of Christian universe of people who are popular speakers and teachers and whatever. They kind of have a name and seems like going well for them and whatever, you know. Living even within our Christian sphere, there's something to be envied, you know.
Yeah.
And that affirming that, yeah, like to be in the sanctuary of God and see the eternity of people means that even that I'm not going to get, hung up about that. So.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's that verse, I would have betrayed the generation of your children. Like if we keep going down that path of envying people who have that, like we're betraying all these people who are supposed to come after us that we're supposed to raise up, these children or quote unquote spiritual children, I guess. So yeah, I was really blessed by that today too. To end off, I'm gonna just give you just one final question, like very general, like words of advice that you would like to share with anyone who listens to D-Pod. The constituent being, you know, you Chicago college students, but also seemingly we have an increasing group of Grace Point postgrads who listen to this, particularly between 23 and 27, according to my Spotify analysis. So there's just, I don't know who they are, but hello to you if you're listening to this. But yeah, any word of advice that you would give to people a little bit younger than us?
Oh man, yeah. You know what? I don't know why this comes to mind right now, but maybe this is what God wants to say to some of y'all or something. I don't know. But I think the concept of having a long time horizon, you know, a lot of our world is a very short time horizon, caring about immediate gratification and things like that, you know. But just the idea of like, I think being gospel oriented and heaven oriented involves having a time horizon, a long one. And I mention that because of the ways I think it applies. And one is really being fueled by hope of heaven and stuff like that. You know, some of my favorite songs that I listen to are like songs that are about heaven, you know, and they are re-energizing. And then it lets me handle stuff that comes my way or stuff that's really a grind, you know. I think we have a lot of people that, you know, are kind of like, oh, this is a grind or whatever. It's like it's hard to have what's the term, firmness of some kind, you know, to keep going. But yeah, there's that, and I think that's even true when it comes to how you're going to be fruitful later, and investment in like, you know, personal growth and in the gospel and stuff. So, like, you're not going to have progress in just a day of reading the Bible or of reading good books, you know, and it's very easy to let those drop out because of the busyness of life and ministry, you know, very easy. Because man, when it's like, well, I am supposed to get this thing ready for Friday and it's Thursday night and I'm working on that. And I'm saying there's not exceptions to this, but like, for me, the commitment I try to keep to and like reading and building up, you know, it's because of like wanting to look to a long term, wanting to be like, okay, I want to be one of the guys that can be a wise and helpful coach or whatever in 40s, but thinking about what I'm going to be in 40s or 50s, even with like exercise and fitness, you know, like this year I've been trying to be more faithful about like health. And it's not because I have bad health, my blood work's good and whatever, but it's because of looking forward and saying, you know what, I want to be going strong when I'm 60 or 70.
Yeah.
You know, and it's like God can have the whole desert period of, you know, Moses and 40 years or whatever, and then all of a sudden he's gonna use you to do something that's much more than you would have accomplished during those 40 years, right? So I think about that, and that's, I think, part of what helps me like not be bitter about periods where I feel like I'm being like underutilized or something, you know. It's all about having that time horizon and saying, you know what, yeah, if I want to be going strong when I'm 60 or 70, instead of being this unloving guy that's making people take me to doctor's appointments and have bad knees and like whatever it is, diabetes. Like, it's just, oh, this is an act of love toward other people, having this long time horizon. And not to mention, it's going to energize me now for what I need to do.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of ways to apply it. That, and it's what Jesus talked about, right? Like, oh yeah, you guys look at, like, you're able to look at what the weather is going to be like tomorrow, right? Based on the red sky, whatever, right? But then, like, you're not interpreting the time when it comes to spiritual things in the gospel, right? So I think it applies obviously to the eternal future of every person we meet and so on. But yeah. Horizon and say, I am not going to be just about how I'm going to feel tomorrow, next day, or the next week. Yeah,
that's good. That it's really interesting because I actually recently listened to a podcast where the person being interviewed was saying that one of the things he does is he asks himself, well, you know, this is a pastor, so he's like, you know, what kind of pastor do I want to be when I'm 60? like what kind of preacher do I want to be when I'm 60, right? But that applies to like, what kind of father do I want to be? What kind of person do I want to be? What kind of mentor do I want to be? Right. Yeah. So I think that's really good. And after hearing that, I actually made some kind of concrete like changes to my weekly schedule as well. And so like the health thing, like I can relate with that because, I recently started going to the gym a lot more often because I was thinking about those same things too. Like, or even my kids in the future and things like that. And
yeah. No, I remember one guy in San Diego asked, he was a recent grad, not married, and he asked a bunch of dudes for advice, And one of them once I told him, I was like, you know what? Look forward to what your life and your schedule and all that is going to have to be like when you're a husband or a dad. And look at things you do now that are not going to, like, this ain't going to fit, Or I wouldn't, if I were doing this then I would be like, what's wrong with you, Cut them out now, right? Or like make the change now. Like, why wait, Is that kind of thing.
That's good. I hope y'all heard that. Nice.
Why wait,
Yeah, that's cool. Hey, thanks, Dan.
I wish I could fully follow it myself, of course.
I know, for sure. Yeah.
Hard.
Yeah. Well, thanks for taking time out on the 20% of the time that you have off. And I'm sure you have to go prep for the Bible study now. So
yeah, thank you for serving Chicago Church. Be grateful for this guy. He works hard.
We try.
Yeah.
All right. Well, the outro. All right, thanks everyone for listening to D-Pod once again. We'll keep inviting some more of our peers on and see what words of wisdom they have to share with us. So that's it for today. Bye-bye.